The streets were no longer quiet. They hummed with a nervous energy, an unease that seemed to creep into every conversation at the diner, every town hall meeting, every whispered argument between neighbors who once shared barbecues and block parties. America, once a place where dreams were promised on billboards and political speeches, was unraveling into something raw, bitter, and deeply divided. It was Trump's America, an era defined not only by policy, but by a feeling. And that feeling was anger. For Maria Hernandez, a nurse in Ohio, that anger wasn't abstract. It was in the exhausted patients she saw every night, their medical bills piled higher than their courage. It was in her brother, who had lost his factory job after 30 years of steady work, his pride crumbling as he applied for part-time shifts at the local grocery store. It was in the neighbors who stopped waving at each other after putting up yard signs, as though red and blue banners had suddenly replaced the bonds of friendship. Maria remembered when politics was background noise, something you voted on once every 4 years and then forgot. Now, it was everywhere, in church sermons, in family dinners, in the very air people breathed. Everyone seemed to have an opinion, and every opinion seemed to carry the weight of survival. Across the country, in a small town in West Virginia, a coal miner named Frank Delaney felt that same weight. He had voted for Donald Trump, not out of ideology, but out of desperation. For years, politicians had promised to save his community, and all he'd seen were shuttered businesses and schools losing funding. Trump's fiery words about bringing back jobs struck him like a gospel. Frank wasn't angry at his neighbors, he was angry at a system that had forgotten him. To him, Trump was not just a politician, he was a chance, however slim, to claw back dignity. Meanwhile, in New York City, Jamal Carter, a young activist, walked through streets where protests had become weekly rituals. He saw Trump not as a savior, but as a threat, someone who thrived on division and amplified hatred. Jamal had grown up believing in the promise of equality, but now he saw fear in the eyes of his immigrant friends, uncertainty in the lives of families who worried about being torn apart by policy. His own grandmother, who had marched for civil rights decades earlier, told him this moment felt familiar, the tension, the suspicion, the sense that America was standing at a crossroads. What made this era so volatile wasn't just Trump himself. It was the way he mirrored back the anger Americans already carried. His speeches became lightning rods, pulling energy from people's frustration and magnifying it. For some, that energy was hope. For others, it was dread. But for everyone, it was impossible to ignore. The pandemic only deepened the wounds. Maria worked 12-hour shifts as hospitals overflowed. Frank watched as coal shipments dwindled, his paycheck shrinking while promises still echoed on TV. Jamal marched through streets filled with tear gas and chants, demanding justice for those who seemed forgotten by the very country that proclaimed liberty for all. Everywhere, the question lingered: what happens when anger becomes the foundation of politics? Families stopped speaking to each other. Communities fractured along invisible lines. Social media turned into a battlefield where empathy was drowned out by rage. America felt like a house divided, not by borders, but by belief. Yet beneath the noise, small stories of resilience bloomed. Maria's patients, despite their exhaustion, brought cookies to the nurses. Frank's wife started a local co-op, helping neighbors trade food and supplies when money ran short. Jamal organized reading groups, teaching young kids about history so they could understand that division was not destiny, it was a choice. These were the quiet revolutions, invisible to the headlines but powerful in their own way. They reminded people that even in Trump's America, even in an age of anger and desperation, humanity had not disappeared. The turning point came not with a single election or speech, but with a realization spreading across kitchens, workplaces, and schools: anger could not build a nation. It could ignite, it could divide, but it could never create. What created was compassion, cooperation, and the courage to listen to someone who didn't think like you. For Maria, that meant sitting at a table with her brother, not arguing about politics but talking about what scared them both. For Frank, it meant reaching out to Jamal after seeing him on the news, realizing that while their lives were different, their pain came from the same broken promises. For Jamal, it meant remembering his grandmother's words, that progress was always hard, always messy, but always worth the fight. Trump's America was a story of desperation, division, and anger, but it was also a story of awakening. It forced people to confront what lay beneath the surface of their country: deep inequities, forgotten communities, and wounds that had never healed. But in confronting them, Americans began to see the possibility of something more. The story doesn't end with unity overnight. It doesn't end with villains vanquished and heroes crowned. It ends with a question, one that still hangs in the air. Will America choose to keep feeding its anger, or will it find a way to rise above it? The answer, as Maria, Frank, and Jamal discovered, doesn't come from politicians. It comes from ordinary people who choose, every day, to see each other not as enemies, but as fellow travelers on the same uncertain road. Because in the end, the true politics of America isn't anger. It's hope. And hope, fragile though it may be, has always been strong enough to carry a nation forward.